Hello, hello, happy Monday, and welcome to the 26th episode of Change School TV, our weekly dose of inspiration for your Monday mojo and mindset reset this week. So those of you who've been tuning in over the past few weeks would know that our topic and theme for this month has been all around fear. And how to recognize when fear is standing in your way, what fear can teach us about ourselves, and how we can channel that fear into a positive force in our personal and professional lives, and also what the journey of transforming fear into freedom looks like. So tonight we have a very special guest. I'm really excited about this. We've got Ezra Mitchell, who is based out of Bali, and he's agreed to come on to the show tonight to share his personal journey of deciding to leave his engineering career to pursue more purposeful work, and the key lessons that his experience has taught him that really speak to the positive outcome of fear when we learn to listen to our intuition and channel fear into focus so that we can make a big, bold career move or reinvent ourselves in our personal and professional lives. So, Ezra, I'm so excited to have you on the show finally and be able to share the great conversations we always have, but this time with our viewers. Before we dive in, I want to just quickly introduce you and a little bit about your work. I've got my little notes from your bio, and just so those who are just jumping in and tuning in can kind of sync up with us before we get started. And one more thing I just want to say for those of you who are just jumping in, please do feel free to jump into the comments and throw out any questions or anything at all that you want to share as Ezra and I are chatting. I will do my best. I don't have my partner in crime tonight, Grace, to help me, but I will do my best to follow the questions and comments that you post as we go, and then we'll see how we go. But if we have some time for a live Q&A at the end, then I will share some of the questions you guys have put out and Ezra can help to answer. And if we don't get to them, then we will, I'll catch up on the questions. Grace is tuning in from Indo tonight as well. So we'll be following the questions, and if we don't get to answer them live, we will in a follow-up jam. Okay, so very quickly, an introduction to Ezra. So Ezra is a coach and speaker on the areas of emotional health and relationships. And his core message is how healing our stories and the relationship with ourselves removes the emotional obstacles that can keep us from creating more happiness in life, work, and love. And Ezra has constantly found value in facing fear and in reinventing himself in the several careers he's had over the last 15 years while studying psychology and personal development for the last decade. And so through his work, he helps people to connect and heal their core leading voice in order to make better decisions and have more confidence on their path. How is that for an intro, Ezra?
Perfect.
Sweet.
I like how you do that. It's great.
Awesome. Okay, I didn't mess anything up. So thanks again for agreeing to come on to share your story of change and sort of be a voice for our Humans of Change community tonight. We've got lots to cover. You've seen some of the questions. We probably won't get through it all, but let's just dive in and see where it takes us.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Great. So I think to start, it would just be really nice to hear from you a little bit about what your career change journey has been. And maybe you can just share a little bit about how you would sort of define like the point A where you started and the point B, so where you are now and what that experience has been like.
Yeah, sure. I would love to. Yeah, I think my story started out just like many other people's stories. I was in high school. I really didn't know what I wanted to do, where I wanted to go, or what kind of life would look like after college or even in college. And I remember taking placement tests in high school to figure out what I would be good at, what kind of careers would be good for me. And one of them that kept standing out was engineering, because I like to build things. I like to take apart things. I like to think about things. And being an engineer was a good career because you can make a decent living from it as well. And this seemed like it checked off all the boxes that I didn't know were my boxes, but they were the ones that presented themselves. So I decided to pursue that after high school. I took a couple of years off to try to find myself after high school instead of jumping into college, but I didn't really find anything more than lots of parties.
Yeah.
When I finally decided to get my act together, I thought I would reconnect with that idea that I knew before of engineering. But I was already still a little bit unsure of where that path would go. So instead of going into a 4-year degree that I was originally going to do right after high school, I decided, well, hey, I'm not sure about this career field. Let me get a degree, a minimum amount of degree, start working. So an associate's degree, a 2-year degree, start working in the field.
Nice.
And if it really resonated with me, I would go back to get my bachelor's degree.
Yeah.
Well, luckily for me, 2.5 years after graduating into my career, 2.5 years, I figured out very quickly this is not what I want to do for the rest of my life. And I had this kind of quarter-life crisis moment, and but I was actually ahead of the curve because I didn't spend 4 to 5 years in college for engineering and then figure out later with twice as much debt, twice as much time invested, that actually this is entirely not what I wanted to be pursuing anymore.
Yeah, super smart. So you dodged a bullet, basically, by I guess kind of putting your eggs in a few different baskets, right? Which is super smart, and trying to see how you can kind of like learn and test it out while at the same time be open to other options, right?
Yeah, I was really, I didn't know it back then, but I was kind of tapping into the beginnings of this intuition, or maybe it was just the feeling that I had, but I think, I really believe it was my intuition calling me back then, even when I didn't know anything about self-development or about my purpose or, what my gifts were. I still had these voices, and I chose to listen to those and still try to move forward at least while listening. And I think that's a really important aspect is we can have these voices that speak to us, but as long as we keep moving forward and see how we can integrate both, kind of follow along two paths, or at least continue to listen to these voices while not getting stuck like in paralysis of continuing to try to think and analyze until the situation is perfect before you act. I know that this has been a big part of my life is I like to think a lot, and I know when thinking can become counterproductive. And as I've gotten older, I realize, okay, there's a certain amount of thinking you need to do, and then you need to take action with that 80% of what you know, because that 20% will actually never come. The perfection will never come without the movement.
No, exactly. No, that's totally right. And I'm definitely guilty of overthinking as well. And as you know from our own conversations, I'm working on the feeling and listening to my intuition. So it's not easy. But okay, so you mentioned like quarter life crisis. So would you say that was kind of like your trigger and moment? Like what kind of made you go, okay, yes, I mean, I know that you kind of realized that engineering wasn't necessarily the path you wanted to pursue, but so what kind of launched you into what you're currently doing, and what was that process kind of like?
Yeah, I think my quarter life crisis stemmed from the realization that for at least my early adult life, I was not really making my own choices. I was following along what society had told me, maybe what my parents had suggested to me, what my friends were doing around me, and that was to go to college, to get a good job, to get a corporate job, to move forward, get a house, get a nice car, and then the wife, and then the kids, and then I'd have the American dream.
Totally.
And when I realized that I had gone to college and spent 2 years and then 2.5 years in a field that I would not be doing for the rest of my life, it really shook me to the core. That helped me realize I need to start thinking for myself, or at least figure out what is important to me, because I've been just kind of doing what everyone else said, thinking that it would work out. And at my very core, it didn't satisfy my own needs. And this is kind of where everything fell apart, and where I began my own journey to self-discovery at 26. I started reading books on self-development, mindfulness, and figuring out, what is really important to me. And it manifested itself in this crazy journey of quitting my career, leaving the country, which I've never left the country before, moving to a new country on the other side of the planet, and just saying, it doesn't matter what's going to happen, I'm going to make it work. Yeah. And I was running on this intuition that I started building while I started preparing for my exit. I planned. I took 1.5 years to plan. I didn't just quit my job and just, believe it would work out. But I took 1.5 years to plan. And as I kind of grew into this idea of moving forward into this reinvention, this life of reinvention, I gained more confidence in myself, in the path that I was creating. And it helped me face a lot of those fears, quitting my job with no job, moving to a country where I didn't even speak the language, on the other side of the planet, where I didn't have a work permit and all of these things. But I was devoted to this journey that started to present itself because I started digging within to find these questions, to find the answers to the questions that were so important to my life.
Yeah, no, totally. And it's funny because I always say, and it's even just from my own experience, right? It's a very thin line sometimes between fear and freedom, right? Because on the one hand, that there's liberation, there's making your own rules, there's anything you want it to be on the one side. But then you're standing right behind the line, looking over, going, oh my God, all the things that could go wrong, So, yeah. I mean, you've kind of already named, the specific things that could have held you back at that time. And you talk about how sort of moving deeper and listening to your intuition helped you to move beyond the fear. But I guess, how did you really address some of those micro things you just mentioned? I know it seems like the smaller details, but sometimes those things at the time that we're going through them feel like the biggest barriers, right? So how did you kind of tackle each of those things? Did you do it all at once? Did you have a systemic way of doing it? Did things kind of just fall into place, or what did that look like?
Yeah, I think, and this is kind of where the nature of my work stems from, the work that I do now. And because it's my own personal experience, and it was everything that was so valuable to me in my transformation, that's what I now help other people find in their lives. And I think the core principle, I think one of the core things to help me face fear is a better understanding of myself, who I am, how much I value myself, love myself, which creates confidence in your own path and confidence against the word of others and society and all this. It's really self-awareness, in order to find, what's important to me, what's my purpose, why am I doing this, who am I, what do I want? These are all questions that I found over the 1.5 years, well, not all of them, but I found some of the key ones to help propel me in this journey. But it's really, I really believe, and that's the reason why I do the work that I do now with people, is life becomes it becomes easier to do when you know who you are and what you're capable of. and you cultivate a belief in yourself, then all the chaos of life becomes much more manageable and attainable and easier to realize and believe that you can create and it can happen for you.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And it's such, I mean, even when you're talking, I'm like, okay, I'm imbibing this stuff in myself as I'm listening. But so, I mean, just running with this topic for a second, like, I mean, would you say, because I think this is always the tough part, even for us at Change School, I feel like there's so many things that we've experienced ourselves, we know other people are going through. And so it's always easier to kind of talk about it and to help other people through it. But at least for me, it's also a journey of, you know, in taking in what I'm sharing. So for you, like, I mean, how do you think, what is your relationship with fear now? Like, do you feel like, okay, I am fear master and I don't ever have that anymore? Or do you think it's something that you'll always have to work with and just you're getting better at it? Or how do you kind of look at fear now for yourself?
Yeah, I wish I was fear master.
Me too.
You know, I used to use the marketing term fearless in some of my marketing before, but I don't think that's really possible. I think it's changing your relationship with fear. There's always going to be fear there. And something that Grace mentioned, I think 2 weeks ago in your first podcast about fear,
Yeah.
was take these small steps to start to introduce yourself to this relationship with fear by doing small things that are outside your comfort zone, that are not the normal things you do. And when you start stepping out of that more, it basically expands your sphere of influence. So the point between what you know and what you don't know, it gets wider, and you can move farther out. And that only happens by leaning on that edge and moving slightly out and seeing it's okay.
Your way over, yeah.
Moving slightly out again. So this is a good one. You know, I still have fear in a lot of the things that I do. One thing that I've been doing for the last year is public speaking, and it's public speaking is actually my biggest fear. And I fear public speaking more than death. I don't fear death, but I fear standing up in a room with 20, 30, 100 people. It's terrifying for me. And so what I've been doing over the last year is I joined Toastmasters, and I've been going twice a month, and I got myself into this position where I kind of became the president, not on my own accord, but I was asked to, and I couldn't really say no, because that's the whole reason I'm here, is to learn how to public speak.
Yeah, totally.
So I committed to that role, and that role required me to speak for 10 minutes every class. And you know what? For the first 6 months, I didn't want to go to one of those classes. I didn't, because the fear and the anxiety was more than the joy of like getting on stage. Yeah. But I had a responsibility and I was accountable. And something I always speak highly about is your word and being accountable. If you can't hold yourself to your own standards, how can you hold anyone else to theirs? So I took on this responsibility, and it forced me to show up week after week. And I got better and better over the last 6 months. And over the last year, I've gotten to a place where, I'm not having an anxiety attack every time I get up on stage. It's just like mild anxiety now, or a little bit of nervousness. And it's really just because I practiced dancing with that fear repeatedly and repeatedly. And I like to say this a lot. This is something I like to say, is that, we're not going to we become braver by facing our fear, not by avoiding it. And so in my life now, whenever I find something that I'm afraid of, whether it's public speaking or going to talk to a girl, or, putting my proposal out to this company, and I feel this fear, I realize this is exactly where I need to go. Because if I go there and I face it, it's going to reduce it. And one day I may not even fear that anymore because it'll be the normal. It'll be the norm. So when I find the fear, I choose to face it and go towards it rather than away from it.
Yeah, no, totally. And that's something we talked about, I think, in last week's episode as well, is how you sort of lean into it, right? And use it as almost like a cue, which is so interesting because a lot of the times when we face fear or encounter it the most, it's when we need to make a change, right? Or we need to take some kind of action. And a lot of times we think we don't know what we should do. But in fact, fear is kind of like that little guy going, this is what you need to do, even though it's making you like want to pee your pants, but you just got to do it anyway.
Yeah, everything you don't want to do is exactly what you need to do.
Exactly what you need to do. I know. That mantra. Cool. Okay. So, I mean, again, so I guess so thinking back to that sort of transition that you made, right? And at any point throughout your journey, I mean, when you look back, is there anything you feel or you wish that you had done differently? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, looking back, my period of transformation was really like a decade. It was 10 years. And I had a lot of fun on the way. I got to do a variety of different career opportunities. I had a lot of opportunity to do a lot of different things to find myself. I really do wish I could have condensed that time into something shorter than a decade.
Yeah.
And for looking back, hindsight, what I see the most significant to shortening that period of time to really finding myself comes down to asking for help. I was really adamant for the first 10 years to doing it on my own. I wanted to say I did it on my own. I didn't need any help. And I wanted to be able to say that. It was a point of pride for me and ego. Now that pride and ego almost killed me. And when I was able to move past that pride and start to ask for help, I made more progress in 2 years with teachers, mentors, coaches, people to guide me than I did in the 10 years prior. So this is the most important takeaway that I had over the last 15 years is to ask for help. And it's much more difficult for men to ask for help. It's what I see in even my clients. But it's important that we all get to that point because we don't have to do it ourselves. There's other people that are doing it at the same time or they've done it before you and they have a lot of great advice. They've got great guidance and they can see your blind spots. They can see your perspectives that you can't see. We can't see 360. We can see like 180. But what about the stuff behind us and to the sides and buried deep within that we can't even see? And so this was the biggest thing for me is to ask for help, to seek out help, and to get that additional perspective in your life because I can't see it all, and it's pretty ignorant to think that I can. And I really believe we have the power within us to heal all our wounds, to find our dreams, to create whatever the life we want. But if we do it by ourselves, it's going to take a lot. It's going to take a lot of time. We can shorten that by getting help along the way.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think, Grace and I have probably shared our own journeys quite a few times as well. And I mean, it's a question I get asked a lot is like, what would you have done differently? And I always say, I don't really believe in regrets, but if anything, I know that there are ways I could have condensed the time it took me to have more clarity, right, around where I am now. And then I just could have done work I love sooner. But we always learn from the journeys that we have anyway. So that's why I say no regrets. So you mentioned your clients, and actually that's something I was hoping you could share a little bit more about. So like what, could you maybe share a bit about like the work that you're doing with clients, what your clients are like, what do they tend to come to you for? And is it, what's the process of really getting them to work with fear and to talk through their fear? Because I know having help is a huge help, but it's still never easy to do, right? So what's that kind of like?
Yeah, what the work I do is really based on my own experience, and what I've seen would have been the most valuable for me along my journey. A lot of coaches and life coaches, they deal with kind of the future. You set goals, you figure out where you want to go, and how to get there, and that's very important. And I do that aspect in my work, but I also realized for me, even when I knew where I wanted to go, there were this emotional baggage that was actually keeping me from executing on the plan that I knew I wanted to create. The how-to. I knew the how-to, but it wasn't as easy as just following the steps. I had these emotional tendencies within me that were dictating my behavior. They created procrastination, they created perfectionism, self-sabotage. I wanted to find success, financial success, but I didn't realize until I started digging deep that I actually didn't feel like I was worthy of success, that I didn't feel like I deserved it. And this was kind of self-sabotaging me along the way. So having the goal and the path before you, it's not always enough, but usually, and I think with most people, is we've got to do a little bit of housekeeping and cleaning up on our past to figure out what is holding us back. What's the baggage? What are the rocks that we're carrying in our backpack that we want to let go of? And how do we let go of that to move forward freer and unencumbered into the life that we want to create? And so that's how I work with my clients is we figure out where they want to go, what they want to create, what their why is, and what kind of life they want to have, but also what is keeping them, what is holding them back from doing those steps? What is the fear? The fear in their relationships, the fear in their profession, the fear of showing up authentically in both their professional and their personal life. So these are really important things to overcome and to solve. It's like sustainably solve, because if you don't address them, they're never going to really go away, and they're always going to stick out their head to kind of sabotage your journey along the way.
Yeah, totally. And I love this analogy of rocks in your bag, because I guess, if you don't address them, they're just going to go the journey with you, and you'll be hauling that stuff through and through, right?
Yeah. That analogy comes from my mentor, my best friend and mentor, and I think it's very fitting and very true.
Yeah.
We want to move forward with less weight, more freer, and then we can fly unencumbered.
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. I love it. Cool. So I guess, on that note, I mean, what would you say? I know, obviously, the work that you do and similar to our work, right? There's no quick fixes. It's not overnight. It is a process and it takes time. But knowing that a lot of people who may be watching tonight are probably at different stages in their journey of fear to freedom, or maybe they're just starting to come to terms with the type of fear that is showing up in their lives personally or professionally. What are some sort of top of mind tips or pieces, nuggets of wisdom that you can share for anyone who's kind of struggling in this phase or struggling with fear in general and trying to figure out what they can do and what small steps they can take, or a personal mantra that they could borrow from you maybe to help them move forward?
Yeah, I think it's really important to begin to understand yourself, and not just your surface view, but really who you truly are and what you truly want, what's important to you, and to be able to separate what you want from actually the fear, the scarcity mindset. Maybe the things you want are just in response to your fear in order to create security or, wealth, and so that you won't be in these states where you're afraid of not having enough or being able to provide for your family. So the way I have my clients to begin this journey to start learning themselves is three things, and that's basically reading, writing, and meditating. mindfulness and meditating, to start tuning into yourself, your intuition, your inner voice, and also to quiet down the chaos of our mind, because it's out of control, and it'll runs away. And if we don't know how to guide our thoughts, they generally default to the negative. So mindfulness is extremely important. Reading, we're not done learning after college. We should, if we want to evolve as humans, as a species, as in our life, we need to continue learning. And whether that's books on fiction or creativity or self-development, whatever you're interested in, continue to keep reading and growing and learning yourself and learning how to get better at life. That's why I got so into self-development, because it was like I was going to school. I was reading textbooks on life, how to do life. And I think this is so important because we don't get any of this in school. We get all these, science and geography and math, and which may be important in certain aspects, in certain contexts, but we don't learn how to do life, how to, have better relationships, how to handle failure, how to, adapt to fear. And so self-development work has really allowed me to get better at life. And that's why I read so much. I have a goal to read 52 books every year. I rarely make that goal, but I always end up reading like 30 or 40 books. And so I think that's a success for me. And a very important one that not a lot of people know about is writing, autobiographical writing. Write about yourself, write about your life, write about how you view yourself, what you're feeling. And these begin to start giving you insight into the patterns of what's going on in your mind. If you're predominantly negative thoughts or positive, or you keep daydreaming about this, or you really focus on this. And so writing helps kind of get in touch with that creative side of yourself as well. And this is important, as well as, I think you mentioned it in the marketing for this video, is finding your why. You've got to know why you're doing what you're doing, because your why will continue regardless of the work, the title you have on your name card. Your why is going to be the same. So figure out what your why is, and then you can structure the kind of work you want to do around it. It's extremely important. Before I had my quarter life crisis, my why is I wanted a Lamborghini. That was my goal, was a Lamborghini, because I knew if I had a Lamborghini, I would have the mansion, and I would have, all of this stuff and the watches and all of this stuff, and I would have a good life, But when I had my crisis, I realized how empty that was, and that wasn't a strong enough why. There was no depth to it. It was a response to scarcity and growing up without much wealth and needing to acquire that to be okay with myself and feel like I made it in life. But I quickly found, when I started diving within myself, that actually none of that stuff really matters.
Yeah.
If you don't have the core important essence of who you are and the life that you create, none of the stuff matters.
Totally. No, I love that last point. And I think, probably a lot of people watching can resonate, if not now, then at some point. I think, and what you said is so spot on, right? It's like, it's not about there being a right or wrong why. It's just that when it lacks the depth, at some point you find that it's empty, right? And it's not enough to keep you going and pushing through hard times and leaning into your fear, right? You just be like, forget the Lamborghini then what's left, right? Awesome. So just maybe as a quick recap, what you shared, I love it. So, knowing who you are and really using things like reading, writing, meditating, and cultivating that practice to really help you kind of connect with yourself. You also mentioned the scarcity mindset, which is so timely because it's something I've been reading about and working on myself. And I already start to see it's like such a subtle but very impactful shift in thinking, right? And when you're suddenly from this place, I read this great example, right? It's like when we get competitive or we worry about our competitors, that's even a scarcity mindset because we think that there's not enough success in the world to go around for everyone, and it was such an interesting way of describing it. I was like, yeah, why do we think success is like only for a select few? Right? And what does that even mean? But you also talk about learning and growth, which I think is definitely a point that resonates with us at the Change School. We obviously start from 20, 30 and onwards, right? So you're way out of school, way in the deep end of life. And we recognize that, yeah, we aren't really equipped when we come out of school to handle what life throws at us. So, like you said, I think you mentioned writing again, which I think is a great one. And actually it's interesting because I hear a lot of people sometimes come to us and go, I see you guys suggesting that we journal and write, and I'm just not the writing type, so I can skip out on that step because I'm good at thinking. And I'm like, coming from someone who overthinks, trust me, it's not the same, because when you're forced to articulate or describe something, I think pen to paper, such a different experience, process of processing, and it's confronting, right? I mean, you don't get to listen to your thoughts, but you can read them on paper, and I think that is a very different impact. And last but not least, finding your why, which I think is also, not an easy step, but a really important one. Right. And to your point about asking for help, I think that's where having help can really also help you to get through that. Now, just to maybe share with a few folks as well, we are going to have Ezra's pro tips for transforming fear to focus available on a downloadable worksheet. And there he's shared another set of tips, which I'll quickly run through, but I won't get into. If you want to do that. You can share it actually, Ezra, if you want. They're your tips. I'm not going to steal your limelight.
Let's see.
Do you have them? If not, I've got them.
Yeah, I got them.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I think, so you asked me for 5 tips. So I kind of went through and figured out what kind of condensed all of this is, the number 1 is direction. Develop and map out your current direction. It will change, and be okay with that. And find your why. What are you moving towards and why? So that's really important to have this direction, at least start mapping it out and be okay. The thing is to be okay with it to change and to evolve. I had no idea what I was going to do after engineering. All I knew was the next step. And so when I was thinking about quitting my career, I had no idea if I wanted to go back to school or if I wanted to do something that didn't relate to school. I just asked myself, well, what do I want to do right now? And it kept showing up over and over and over again, and it was to travel. It was something I wanted to do after high school, but I didn't get to do. I didn't have the money, so I went and worked for a while, and then I went to school. And it kind of worked out. This was the perfect time for me to travel and to, find myself. And I didn't know where that was going to end. I just basically said, okay, I have enough money. I plan to travel for a year and see where it takes me. And then hopefully something will show up and I'll start working again. But what I also did is I prepared. So I thought, okay, I'm going to travel, but what can I do? What can I do for work while I travel? And at the time, about 15 years ago, most of the people that were traveling overseas from the US were teaching English. So I thought, okay, I could travel and teach English. But I also didn't want to be, naive and think, oh, I'm just going to show up in Korea and teach English with no experience. Actually, you don't need any experience when you start. But what I did was decided, okay, if I'm going to teach English, let me see if I actually enjoy it, and let me see if I can get better at it. So what I did was I volunteered for a year before I left the States, and I taught English to immigrants 4 times a month at a literacy center. And it was my first experience in a teaching environment. And it's a feeling that I would later understand. I would find out why teachers are so passionate about the work they do, the connection with the student, and how you're helping people increase the quality of their life, and ultimately have better lives. So that kind of spoke to me, and that's how I prepared for my journey. So I just didn't jump, I started building a parachute even before I jumped, and then I continued to build it while I was on the way down. But so, find your direction, find your why, create your direction, start moving to it. If you don't know what step 10 is, you don't need to know step 10. You just need to know step 1. And then 1 will get you to 2, and 2 will get you to 3. I always say, think of it like you're walking through fog. You can't see where the destination is. All you can see is 3 feet in front of you. But once you take that step, the next 3 feet will show itself, and you just move slowly like that. So direction is my first tip. The second tip is awareness, which I mentioned earlier, is you need to dig deep to find out who you truly are. What are the core drivers of your fear? What is driving that fear? And there is something that's driving it. Not everybody's afraid of the same things. We're afraid of different things because of our experiences in life, our experiences in childhood. So find out what's those driving those fears, and then you can begin to face those and separate those motivations from your why. Because you want to make sure that your why is not because of fear, but it's because of truly opening up to expansion, to be who you want to be, not because of what you're afraid of losing or not having. So you want to make sure you very clearly get the differentiation between your why and fear. Number 3 is intuition. So meditation, self-reflection, awareness, writing, it will all start to help build this intuition and ultimately confidence in listening to your intuitive voice. Intuition is a combination of experience and what you're feeling. It's not one or the other. It's not just what you feel, what your heart says to do, but the experience of what you've gone through in the past. You don't want to be in a pattern where you keep listening to your heart and doing things that get you hurt if you're not looking at the experience of, oh, I did this and now I got hurt. Oh, but my heart says to do it again and I got hurt again. So it's really understanding the combination of how the experience and what you feel work together to create that intuition.
Yes.
Number 4 is analysis. So I am a real analytical and statistical person. I make lists of everything. I categorize a lot of things in my life. I like to see how I'm doing. And this is a very important thing I started doing a few years ago, was to do an end of year report on my life.
Yeah.
I never did this before. I started doing it about 3 years ago. And it's very helpful because I'll give you last year as an example. So last year, I didn't hit the one goal that I set for myself. And my biggest goal, I didn't hit it, was to take my business to a financially secure state in my business. And I didn't make that goal for various reasons. And so I was really hard on myself, for the last few months, for the last couple of weeks of December, until I did my end of year report. And I started looking at all the successes that I actually had during that year. And we very quickly forget about our successes. And so this end of year report helped remind me of the dozens of successes that I had throughout the year that really, in comparison to the one goal that I didn't reach, it was like I didn't fail my year. Like I didn't reach this goal, but I had a lot of success in my year. And it made me feel so much better at the end of the year of where I was within my business when I reminded myself of that. I took an analytical viewpoint of the last year, and I reminded myself of all my successes.
Yeah, that's a huge one. And I'm just sorry, just to interrupt. It's so true, because I think, for me, something I was working on last year a lot was just like anxiety in general, and always being hard on myself more on a day-to-day. And so I started doing that on a daily basis. So before dinner, I would just like quickly go onto my notes on my computer and just write everything that I felt I did. And it didn't just have to be work. It was even like, okay, went to yoga for an hour, did 99% of the class without dying. That's 2 wins in one. And again, it's such a subtle shift, but such a great impact, and I felt I could already feel from day one the difference. Like the minute I'd go and have dinner, I was in such a different headspace, because I was like, okay, yes, I didn't finish everything on my task list, but I have a long list of things I achieved and accomplished today, and that feels good, So I love that one. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's even better. Do it more than once a year.
Well, everyone's got their own needs, right?
Yeah.
I was a serious case, so.
Yeah. And that what you're doing every day is basically, it's gratitude work.
Exactly.
And it's reminding yourself of the success you did have and what you're grateful for. And that's something I do, and I practice on a daily basis as well. And so when we don't do that, we very quickly give our failures priority in life over our successes, and we don't even know we're doing that.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. So it's important to do that more frequently than less frequently.
Yeah.
And my last tip is momentum. So keep moving forward towards bigger challenges. Don't rest on your laurels. Like we will never be done with growing in this life. We will never get to a point where you're like, oh, I'm done.
Yeah.
I can just sit back and just lay on a beach and drink margarita, and I'm done with life. We're sold this dream, but it's actually not a reality, because after about 10 margaritas and a splitting headache hangover, you're not going to want to do that for longer than a couple of weeks. You're going to want to do something productive with your life or get back to it. So keep moving forward onto bigger challenges. This is how you continue to face your fears, is you find new things that you're afraid of. And something that happens to me is I face a fear, and then I rest on it, and then I put it on the back burner. And then when it comes time to do it again months later, I've forgotten the success that I had before, and I have to re-engage and do this.
So annoying.
And this is what I experience with like YouTube videos. I'm very inconsistent with my videos, and every time I start to do videos again, I have to get over this, this, am I good enough? Do people want to hear me? What will they say? What will they think? How do I look? And it takes me like a month just to get over the fear to do that video again. But then I do like 3 or 4 videos in a row, because it's easy after the first one. So it's really important for facing your fear to keep that momentum, keep the consistency, keep doing it, or keep looking for new challenges to test you even more. And it will keep you in the zone of facing that fear rather than running from it.
Totally. Love it. And that connects with the accountability piece too that you talked about earlier. Great. Awesome. So the 5 tips, just to recap quickly: direction, awareness, intuition, analysis, and momentum. And we will recap that in the blog post that we always share at the end of the live session. So I'll share the links. Grace will share the links, but just so you guys know, it's at bit.ly Change School TV 26 recap. And the downloadable tip sheet with everything Ezra just shared will also be available to you at bit.ly/Change School TV 26 download. So we'll share those links later on. But Ezra, maybe you just want to share with anyone watching, and then I'll take a sneak peek if there's any questions that I can see on my phone, how people can connect with you, or how you'd prefer for people to connect with you, and where they can find more info. And while you do that, I'm going to check.
Yeah. You guys are welcome to check me out on EzraMitchell.com or on my Instagram at Ezra Mitchell. Pretty easy to find. My Instagram is also my personal blog. It's where I microblog, so I don't just post pretty pictures. I'm not actually that much of a photographer, but I use Instagram to write about some of these topics: facing fear, relationships, emotional health, self-love. You know, really the core of my work revolves around self-love. And if you can re-engage with yourself and bring that love back to yourself and heal that part of yourself, it gets so much easier to face fear. It gets so much easier to find the confidence to do life, to face life, and to also handle the failures and the challenges that come with life when we have a more complete sense of self and a healthy self-image. So EzraMitchell.com, Ezra Mitchell on Instagram. My blog is also on Ezra Mitchell, my long format blog as well. And I have a YouTube channel as well. You can find it by looking up my name as well. And yeah, I think that's everything.
That's everything. Cool. We'll share all those links as well in the follow-up. We've got lots of hearts and likes flying around. And I know I can't see everything right now because this is just the difficulty was with the phone. But what I do see, I will share, which is more comments. So Emily said, when you can become a student, you're the master. Thanks for that. Jay said, be okay to change and evolve. Love this. And I want to see if I can't actually pull up this other comment. So, okay, I'm sorry, guys. Sometimes these technical issues are just like that. From what I can see, thank you for commenting. For any questions I've missed, we will catch them up. You now have Ezra's contact info too, and we'll share that. So if you want to reach out to him with any more questions, more than welcome. Yeah. And so Ezra, thank you so much for sharing everything. Absolutely love chatting with you as always.
Yeah, appreciate the time on here. This is great.
Yeah, it's been awesome. Thank you so much. Such a good start to the week. And that's a wrap. Is there anything that I missed that you wanted to share, or yeah?
I guess just like my last thing to everyone out there watching.
Yeah, please.
Your answers to your questions are out there. Actually, they're in here. So if you haven't found them yet, just continue to dig. Continue to, I like to say, be your own archaeologist, to dig up who you truly are. Your authentic self is buried in there under all of the dirt of life and the experiences. So keep digging, keep digging. You will find the answers to your questions, and get help along the way, because 2 shovels is better than 1.
Absolutely. And 2 brains are better than 1, and 2 hearts are better than 1. Awesome. Okay, thank you so much, Ezra. I won't hold you up anymore, but really, really appreciate you coming on and sharing all this amazing stuff. And we'll keep in touch anyways, and we'll see if there's any questions we missed. Yeah?
I'll see you the next time I'm in Singapore. Thanks a lot, Swati.
Yes, please do. Take it easy. Have a great week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.